Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we gather not merely to witness an announcement, but to witness a moment in history, a moment when the courage to seek peace has finally overcome the fear of endless conflict. In a world where headlines are often filled with division, despair, and destruction, it takes extraordinary strength to stand up and say, enough. Enough pain, enough loss, enough silence between hearts that should have been listening to one another all along. What we have seen today in Israel is not just a political milestone, it's a human awakening. It's a reminder that when leaders lead with empathy instead of ego, when nations dare to speak instead of fight, when people dare to forgive instead of fear, miracles begin to unfold. Jared and I came here not to speak as politicians or diplomats, but as people, as parents, as partners, as human beings who believe in the simple, powerful truth that peace is possible. We came to say that even in the ashes of war, there is always a seed of renewal. And I want every person listening to remember this. Peace is not born in conference rooms or signed on paper, it's born in the heart. The heart of a mother praying for her child's safety. The heart of a father choosing hope over hatred. The heart of a nation choosing compassion over vengeance. That is why this moment matters. Because it tells every one of us that no matter how far humanity falls, we can always rise again, stronger, wiser, and united. So tonight, as you listen, I invite you not just to hear words, but to feel them. Let us explore together the courage it takes to build peace, the faith it requires to forgive, and the light it spreads when we choose to believe, not in power, but in purpose. Because this speech is not just about Israel. It is about all of us, about the future we are building, the hope we are protecting, and the humanity we must never lose. This is a story of peace, of perseverance, and of the promise that tomorrow can be better, if we have the strength to make it so. When I speak of peace, I am not speaking of a fragile truce or a momentary pause in violence. I am speaking of something far deeper, a peace that begins within us. Because peace is not simply the absence of war, it is the presence of understanding, of dignity, of human compassion. It is the decision to put aside pride, to rise above the noise of anger, and to choose what is right over what feels easy. For too long, the world has confused pride with power. We have been taught to believe that strength is measured by who stands tallest, who speaks the loudest, who refuses to yield. But true strength, the kind that transforms nations and hearts alike, is quiet. It listens when others shout. It forgives when others blame. It builds bridges when others are content to burn them. That is the power of peace over pride. Standing here today, after a ceasefire that so many feared might never come, we are reminded of what courage truly looks like. It takes courage to fight, yes, but far more courage to stop fighting. It takes courage to admit that pain has run its course, and that it is time to heal. The world often mistakes compromise for weakness, but there is nothing weak about choosing peace. It is an act of extraordinary will to silence the echoes of the past and to trust in the possibilities of tomorrow. Every nation carries its history, the victories, the scars, the griefs that shape its soul. Yet at some point, a generation must step forward and say, we will not let the past dictate our future. We will not be prisoners of our pride. The people of this region have known suffering, but they have also shown resilience beyond imagination. They have proven that even after everything has been lost, the human spirit can still rebuild, not through vengeance, but through vision. When leaders stand together and extend their hands rather than their weapons, something extraordinary happens. The language of hostility begins to fade, replaced by the language of hope. The heart begins to heal in places politics could never reach. That is what this moment represents. Not a victory of one side over another, but a victory of humanity over hatred. The choice to end conflict is never simple. It is layered with pain, mistrust, and sacrifice. But peace demands that we look beyond the pain to see the shared humanity that connects us all. It asks us to listen, not just to respond, but to understand. Because when we listen, truly listen, we begin to see ourselves in others. And when we see ourselves in others, it becomes impossible to wish them harm. There are those who will say peace cannot last, that people will always return to division, that human nature is too flawed to sustain harmony. but I do not believe that. I believe peace endures when it is rooted in purpose. When it is guided by empathy. When it is nurtured every day by the belief that our children deserve a world better than the one we inherited. The task before us now is not to celebrate an end, but leadership, in its truest form, has never been about authority or control. It has always been about service, the kind of service that uplifts others, that brings light to places shadowed by fear, and that inspires people to believe again. Leadership rooted in humanity asks not, what can I gain? But rather, what can I give? It is built not on the desire to be followed, but on the determination to do what is right, even when no one is watching. When we look at the challenges around us, the conflicts, the divisions, the growing loss of trust, it becomes clear that what the world needs most is not louder voices, but kinder hearts. We have seen leaders rise and fall through history, some remembered for their victories, others for their vision. Yet the ones who endure, the ones who truly transform lives, are those who lead with empathy. They do not seek to dominate, they seek to understand. They do not rule from a distance, they walk beside those they serve. To lead with humanity is to remember that every policy affects a person, every decision shapes a life, and every word spoken carries the power to heal or to harm. Leadership is not about how high one stands, but about how deeply one cares. When compassion becomes the foundation of power, power becomes a tool for progress. There is something profoundly moving about witnessing leadership that listens, leadership that looks into the eyes of those in pain and says, I see you. I hear you. And I am here for you. Because that simple recognition, that moment of shared humanity, can rebuild faith faster than any speech or promise ever could. The world does not crave perfection from its leaders, it craves sincerity. People do not follow charisma, they follow character. True leadership requires balance, the ability to remain strong without becoming hard, and gentle without becoming weak. It means leading with intellect, but never without integrity. It means knowing when to speak and when to remain silent so that others can be heard. And it means understanding that progress is not measured by applause, but by impact, by the quiet, meaningful change that ripples through communities when hope replaces despair. What we are witnessing now is a moment when leadership has been called to evolve, from authority into accountability, from pride into purpose. The world is changing faster than ever, and so must the way we lead. The days of ruling through fear are ending, the age of leading through understanding has begun. Humanity must become the compass that guides every decision, every action, every vision for the future. It is not enough to sign treaties or declare intentions. Words must be lived. Promises must be proven. The people of the world, especially the younger generation, are watching, not for perfection, but for authenticity. They are not inspired by power that divides, but by courage that unites. Leadership today must be transparent, empathetic, and rooted in the belief that trust is one of the most fragile, yet powerful forces in our world. It is invisible, but it shapes everything, the way we live, the way we lead, the way we love. When trust breaks, it doesn't just divide nations, it divides hearts. And when it's restored, it has the strength to heal even the deepest wounds. Rebuilding trust after conflict is never easy, but it is possible. It requires humility, honesty, and above all, hope. Because trust is not something we demand, it is something we earn, moment by moment, choice by choice. After years of tension, the world looks at moments like this ceasefire with cautious optimism. People ask, can peace really last this time? Can we truly believe again? Those are fair questions, born from years of disappointment. Trust cannot be rebuilt with words alone, it must be proven through actions that reflect sincerity. Promises must become practice. Compassion must become policy. And leaders must not only speak about peace, but embody it. Rebuilding trust begins when both sides decide to listen, not to prepare their next argument, but to truly understand the pain and perspective of the other. That kind of listening requires grace. It requires patience. It asks us to put aside the walls of pride and the armor of self-righteousness and look at one another not as enemies, but as people, people who have suffered, people who have lost, people who still, despite it all, hope for a better tomorrow. When we learn to see one another through that lens, we rediscover the humanity that conflict tries to erase. And from that humanity, trust begins to take root again. Trust is not built in headlines or declarations, it is built in quiet acts of consistency. It is built in the way leaders show restraint when provoked, in the way communities choose forgiveness over fury, in the way individuals open their hearts again after being hurt. It is slow, it is fragile, but it is powerful beyond measure. This ceasefire is not just a pause in violence, it is an opportunity, a chance to show that dialogue can replace destruction, that compassion can coexist with strength. Trust grows in those small moments of restraint, in the gestures of goodwill that may seem simple but carry great meaning. When a nation chooses to rebuild a school instead of a wall, when a hand is extended instead of a weapon, that is trust being reborn. But rebuilding trust is not only the work of diplomats or governments. It is the work of every person who dares to believe that peace begins within themselves. Trust starts in families, in friendships, in communities. It begins when we treat each other with dignity even when we disagree. It begins when we choose to see the humanity in those who see the world differently. The same values that heal nations are the ones that heal relationships, patience, compassion, respect, and truth. We must also understand that rebuilding trust does not mean forgetting the past. It means learning from it. The past teaches us Hope is a quiet force. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention, and yet, it is the most powerful energy that exists within the human heart. In times of darkness, when fear feels louder than faith and despair feels closer than light, hope whispers, and somehow, that whisper is enough to keep us moving forward. Hope is the heartbeat of peace, the foundation of progress, and the promise that no matter how broken things appear, something beautiful can still be rebuilt. Standing here today, after so many years of conflict and countless moments of uncertainty, we are reminded that hope is not naive. It is not blind optimism or wishful thinking. Hope is an act of courage. It is the decision to see beyond what is, and to believe in what could be. It is the strength to plant seeds of peace even in the soil of suffering, trusting that one day, those seeds will grow. The ceasefire we have witnessed is more than a pause in violence, it is a signal that hope is still alive. It tells us that even in a world scarred by conflict, people can still find the strength to choose understanding over anger, and cooperation over chaos. That choice, that spark of humanity, is the foundation upon which every lasting peace is built. And it begins with hope. Hope asks us to believe when the world tells us to give up. It asks us to forgive when we have every reason to remain bitter. It asks us to see light when all we have known is shadow. That is not easy. But nothing meaningful ever is. Every great achievement, every lasting change, has begun with someone, somewhere, daring to hope. For too long, the story of humanity has been written in the language of division, us versus them, right versus wrong, power versus weakness. But hope writes a different story. It reminds us that we are not each other's enemies, we are each other's possibility. It reminds us that while we cannot change the past, we can transform the future. And in this moment, that transformation is not just possible, it is within reach. Hope is not built in speeches or ceremonies, it is built in actions. It grows every time a child goes to school without fear, every time a community rebuilds after destruction, every time two former rivals choose to meet at the same table instead of standing on opposite sides of it. Hope lives in the hearts of ordinary people who do extraordinary things, who show kindness when none is expected, who forgive when it feels impossible, who keep believing in the good even when the world gives them every reason not to. There will be those who dismiss hope as weakness, who claim that the world is too complicated, too divided, too wounded to heal. But the truth is, hope has always been the most resilient force on earth. Empires have risen and fallen, technologies have changed, borders have shifted, and yet, hope endures. Because hope does not belong to governments or leaders, it belongs to people. It belongs to every soul who wakes up in the morning believing that Toda.